This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community. What we're trying to do is get a little bit out of the box tonight and look at alternatives to what our traditional utilities provide in terms of energy and what those opportunities are in working with the utilities and working outside the utility bubble, if you will. So what we're going to start with is introductions. And first of all, I'm Bill Bugbee. I'm president of Community Forums. We are an all-volunteer organization which presents its own challenges. And we are also a nonprofit organization, which also presents some challenges. So I want to thank each one of you that did provide a donation to help make this forum possible this evening. So to begin with, Isaac Moriwaki is with the attorney with Earth Justice, and in their headquartered Mid-Pacific headquarters. Isaac has over a decade of experience in litigating both federal and state courts and agencies on a range of issues, including water rights, native Hawaiian rights, shoreline protection, endangered species, environmental health and disclosure, as well as clean energy. And I would say that in the new administration, Isaac, you're going to keep real busy in the next 4 years. Thank you for coming from Oahu this evening. Appreciate that. Also joining Isaac is Robert Harris. Robert is Director of Public Policy for Sunrun, Hawaii's largest residential solar provider. Robert's focused on environmental and energy policies for the past decade as well, and his duties at Sunrun include regulatory work both in Hawaii and California, and he is also the spokesperson for the Alliance for Solar Choice. Sunrun is, like some of its peers, has really been a leader in a marketplace that is, in a word, emerging. And in this emerging marketplace, there's been regulatory challenges and there's been technology challenges. And I think companies that are leading in the transition to clean energy and to solar should really not just be looked at as vendors, but also as leaders in the industry. And so thank you for that. Joining Robert is Henry Curtis. Henry's an interesting guy. He is the executive director of Life of the Land, Hawaii's own energy, environmental, and community action advocacy group. He also writes a very, very informative blog, and he's also from Oahu, and he's no stranger to the legislative processes that go on over there in keeping the rest of us informed about what goes on when we can't always be in Oahu during the legislative session. Its group's mission of Life of the Land is to preserve and protect, through the Life of the Land, sound energy and land use policies, and to promote open government through research, education, advocacy, and when necessary, litigation. Henry will tell his own story better than I can, but one of the things that Life of the Land's been involved with is the process of shepherding, is the best word I can use, the state's transition to its 2045 renewable portfolio goal, and the variety of PUC give and take processes that have gone on between the utility and the public on meeting that requirement. He's got some very interesting stories on that. I want to move on to Noel Moreland. He is president of Big Island Electric Vehicle Association, also an owner of 2 EVs, as Noel is an owner of, I think, 3 EVs. 2's not enough, okay. Basically, the Big Island EV Association is comprised of electric vehicle enthusiasts who are actively have a mission to promote the adoption of EVs in the state of Hawaii. I had the fortunate opportunity to look at his presentation before this evening, and I think you'd be surprised at how far electric vehicles have come and are headed. And the opportunities that you just don't necessarily have to buy a Nissan Leaf, which is a very good car. There's a lot of other opportunities coming down the line. Their group mission for the EV Association is to educate the general public about the advantages of EVs, and Noel's going to do an excellent job of that this evening, I'm sure. Thank you. Jose Dizon, almost like the mustard, but not quite. Jose is general manager of the energy and infrastructure at Parker Ranch and Paliano Power Company. Parker is an interesting story and process, and one that we should all watch closely, because they are basically taking advantage of the technologies available today to move to clean energy very quickly. The Parker Ranch is pursuing renewable energy potential with the use of alternative technologies to benefit Waimea and North Kohala communities, as well as Hawaii Island. One of the things that Jose is going to talk about this evening is the utilization of pumped storage. We know that renewables are intermittent. Sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow, and storage is a key component of making renewables a 24/7 energy. They have achieved that, and we'd like to hear more about that this evening. He has a broad experience in utility background. He did work with Hawaii Electric Company at one point in time, and has had numerous leadership positions, including systems, corporate planning, communications, and equally important, engineering. So with that, I want to say thank you, presenters. Thank you very much for coming this evening. And one last thing, a special thanks to Isaac, Robert, and Henry for flying in from Oahu to join us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us, and I'm Isaac, and I'm honored and privileged to be part of this great group tonight. I was invited to speak a little bit about the overall picture here under this bad Trump episode we find ourselves in, and Hawaii's leadership role, really the leadership role we need to take as a people and state of Hawaii to lead the charge for the nation and the world in clean energy and climate issues. So, everything you hear about the Trump administration on clean energy and climate is as bad as it sounds, as we think. It's worse than we ever imagined. We're talking about a across-the-board rollback of everything that the Obama administration was accomplishing. For example, starting with the Clean Power Plan, which was the nation's best hope of some kind of regulation of carbon pollution. We're also seeing the rollback of the methane regulations of the gas industry, and even reporting requirements, the mercury toxics controls, ozone, smog, you name it, they're throwing it out the window. So pretty much the polluting industries are control of the EPA and all the regulating agencies. As you've heard, they're trying to basically eliminate the EPA. It's no joke. They're basically going full bore against that. And recently, Trump announcing that we're going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which is the world's best hope of getting a handle on this looming climate catastrophe. So, the three rays of hope here, the drivers of the counter wave in this bad Trump episode, are really other governments and institutions, including the state of Hawaii, the clean energy market, and the people writ large. So, other governments and institutions, you may have heard, within days of the Paris withdrawal announcement, Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, enacted a law that committed to the Paris Agreement, and we've joined 10 other states, including California, New York, Washington, in the U.S. Climate Alliance, committing to those goals. And in a totally separate, independent movement, there's this We Are Still In alliance that includes 1,000+ states, cities, businesses, and institutions like universities, including Hawaii again. And the combined size of this movement is larger than most countries. So we have pushback there. And again, number two, the market, which is already in motion, and really this clean energy wave can't be stopped at this point. Globally, last year, there was a historical record amount of renewables installed. In the United States, clean energy is that green part of the pie in electric generation, already employing more people than the fossil fuel industry, which is the rest of the pie. Solar and wind jobs growing 12, 15%, times, 12 to 15 times or more faster than the rest of the US economy. And of course, batteries, so that's another graph showing there on the top, the solar industry accounting for more jobs than all the fossil fuel, the second bar combined. And then batteries are the game changer. It's just a graph showing how the costs have been declining with the bars, and then the technology, battery density, the graph going upwards, has been increasing year over year. And then really that's the game changer, right? So Hawaii is seeing basically batteries arriving. Solar plus batteries are cheaper than fossil fuels. The Kauai utility is installing utility scale batteries and solar at a price way cheaper than the utility can provide fossil fuel power. Robert's going to talk about home solar and batteries that are also providing power cheaper than utility plug power. So this wave of the future is already washing over Hawaii. And then number three, the people. All the polls show the tide of history is with us. It's just a matter of when. But of course, time is short. But the polls show 70, 80% of people supporting climate pollution regulation, supporting funding of renewable energy, supporting renewable energy requirements for utilities. So the Trump administration is really the minority, and it's just a matter of time before the pendulum swings backwards. Now, what does this mean for Hawaii? Again, it's our kuleana to take that leadership role in climate and clean energy. Hawaii is on the front lines of climate change. We have the most to lose, or as much as anyone else, as an island state. There's Waikiki there underwater. And more than ever, it's full speed ahead. So we talked about the Clean Power Plan, and this was what the Obama administration was contemplating for the nation in terms of percentage reductions. And if you look at Hawaii, it was 0% because the EPA still hadn't figured out how to deal with this state. But in any event, Hawaii was already forging ahead, way ahead of this, basically what was amounted to a floor that the federal government was contemplating. Even the draft Clean Power Plan, I think its target for Hawaii was something like 12%, and we've already exceeded 20-something, 23%. And so, as you know, Hawaii is the first in the nation to adopt the 100% renewable standard. And as Henry will probably explain, we still need to tighten up this law because technically we could meet this 100% renewable standard and still be burning fossil fuels. There are loopholes there that we need to address, but there have been efforts already in the legislature to clean this up, and it's just a matter of time as we continue to ratchet this thing higher. And you know what? Hawaii is leading the way. There's other states already contemplating following our lead. California and Massachusetts are talking about 100% renewable standard now as well. Then, besides addressing the high-level policy like the renewable standards and mandates, we need to continue our work, and everyone here is involved in some level of reforming the way our electric grid and our electric utility works, right? There's an ongoing tension and clash between the top-down traditional model of the utility monopoly and the bottom-up clean energy forces that include distributed energy resources that Robert's going to talk about, home batteries, home solar, the microgrids that Jose is going to talk about, where we're building a new grid of the future from the bottom up. So there are many examples, and we can talk about that maybe in the question and time, about our incumbent utility resisting this bottom-up transformation. And I'll just give you a few examples. There's an ongoing saga of repeated utility proposed plans. And finally, after many attempts, I think we're on the 4th or 5th version at this point, the PUC keeps on rejecting these proposals. The utility has moved on from its desire to just convert its whole generation fleet to liquefied natural gas. It's gotten the message on that for now, but it's still a very utility-centric top-down plan where the whole customer side of the equation, where customers are taking control of their energy future and helping us drive to that 100% mandate, whether it's energy efficiency or rooftop solar and batteries, it's kind of like put in a box outside of the whole planning process, and it's not really maximized for its full benefits even in the latest version of the plan. And so that's an example of how we need to reform the way the utility thinks, does business, plans, and align everyone in the same direction that we need to go. So we're all pushing in the right direction. There's other examples. If you look at this island in particular, the utility trying to acquire the Hamakua energy plant, folks may be familiar with that. Jose and his company was instrumental in defeating that proposal. But another example of the utility trying to maintain, perpetuate the traditional fossil fuel top-down monopoly business. The Huhonua biomass plant is another example. Helco, jumping in with that proposal. And all the travails and sort of controversy, around that particular plant. So, lots of work to do in Hawaii to achieve our goals, and then ending up where we started off. The worst thing about all of this is just the delay at the federal level in getting the job done, what we need to do. But I believe that the polluters and the climate deniers have badly overplayed their hand, and it's just a matter of time because they are on the wrong side of history. And so with that background, we'll turn it over to the rest of our illustrious group. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for the invitation to be here, for everyone who's here present, and for the folks who helped put this together. And also thanks to Representative Lowen for showing leadership at the House on these kinds of issues and for being here tonight. My name is Robert Harris. I work for Sunrun, which is the country's largest solar provider, residential solar provider, and here in Hawaii, I think, shown a lot of leadership. Speaking of solar jobs, I did want to ask how many people here are employed in the solar industry? Anyone? Well, we're really proud of the number of people employed from, in the solar industry here in Hawaii and the number of jobs it's created. I just sort of want to tag on to what Isaac was saying. This is obviously a California picture. I apologize, I didn't actually take the time to put together something like this in Hawaii, but every single one of these is actually a Sunrun customer and sort of shows the power or the influence you can see in communities. Where here in Hawaii, 1 in every 3 single-family homes now has solar. So I've been really fascinated by the concepts of sort of revolutions or transformations or why they happen. And it's funny, as I started trying to think about why, one incident came back into my mind where in high school, I used to always cuff my jeans. And I had this really attractive woman come up to me and basically ask, why do you still do that? And sort of at that moment, I looked around, there's a bunch of people around me, and I realized everybody was suddenly wearing loose, fitted jeans that were dark blue, and I still had the acid wash jeans that were cuffed. I sort of realized I completely missed this transformation. I was the only one left who was still wearing this. So anyways, ever since then, I think maybe I've been a little bit interested in why we change and how things evolve. And we have a lot of examples now, whether it be the iPhone and what impact that's had on a number of industries, from music, whatever, telecommunications, the cell phone from landline. And I think we're seeing that happen with regards to energy. So this came out a little bit different than how I prepared it, but this is supposed to be a little bit larger, but you'd see in this 34% of the current renewable energy in Hawaii is now coming from rooftop solar. and utility scale PV, if you were to add that in the purple, the net effect of the amount of renewable energy we're getting in Hawaii is really coming from solar. And it's really people like yourselves that are sort of the movers and shakers are really helping this adoption happen. And then as Isaac referenced, we now have a situation where it's cheaper to self-generate. This is from a Star Advertiser article back in May 2016. It's now cheaper to self-generate power at home using solar, generating it during the night, storing it in a battery, and then sort of being reliant on it overnight. So sort of having largely almost all of your power generated on site, it's cheaper than buying it from utility, which is a pretty radical transformation if you think about it. Or actually, you could even argue maybe it's not that radical because, about 100 years ago, almost all power was distributed. You used to always sort of have your power from your street, and sort of we had this advent of cheap transmission lines, which sort of created this model of large, centralized utility power plants. In some ways, we're moving back, I think, to the older model where it's, more inexpensive to self-generate and potentially have a different relationship with the utility of the power grid. And part of that is we're talking about technology. If you think about fossil fuels, it is a commodity, and with time, commodities just get more expensive as they get less and less or more rare. Whereas technologies, traditionally, as they aggregate, you make more of them, they just get less and less expensive. So we're seeing that clearly with solar, and we're also seeing the same thing being true with storage. And so with time, the idea is it just gets less and less expensive. And that is generally true today. Renewable energy is now the cheapest form of electricity around. So this is an example of, you saw earlier the picture of the first Sunrun Brightbox system, which is using, in this case, 2 Tesla Powerwalls. This is the first week that this was in operation. And you can see the customer essentially, the blue and the green are showing, green showing solar production and blue's self-consumption from the battery. And you can see a little bit of red here and there where they're pulling power from the grid. But basically, you're seeing this customer being roughly 90% or more self-reliant and producing the power they need. You see little spikes at the top of red where they're pulling power from the grid. This customer has an electric vehicle and a number of energy-efficient electric items. And so when he'd plug it in, you'd sort of see some spikes. But the gross effect that to the utility is relatively small amounts of power being consumed by this home. So, what's changed really is home's no longer at the edge, it's becoming the center, and I think the general point of view I'm trying to get across is where things are going to happen more and more are going to sort of be at the home level because people can install this, be self-reliant, and now can start looking at opportunities. If you have 1,000 of these systems installed, which we should have relatively soon, you start being able to say, well, that's a lot of battery and storage deployed on the grid that can benefit the grid whenever it's needed. And generally, I want to make the case that this is generally beneficial to everyone, to ratepayers at large, even those who don't have solar, and to those that do. This is a graph, and I'm sorry, it's sort of the wonkiest part of the presentation. This is a graph showing the power needs of, in this case, I think it's Hawaiian Electric, over the past roughly 5 to 6 years. And so you can see the blue and the green, where basically the peak used to be at the middle of the day. And this is a week-long peak at the middle of the day. And if you look at the red bar, you're starting to see the more recent charts where the over amount of electricity that we need or fuel we're consuming is drastically reduced. And during the middle of the day, you're actually seeing the entire peak shift where now our peaks sort of in 7 to 8 p.m. time period. So we've drastically reduced the amount of energy we need in Hawaii as a result of largely solar, but also energy efficiency. And the net customer bill impact, if you just look at the amount of less fuel we have to buy and just factor it in, taking out account of fuel up and down prices, just the sheer amount that we're purchasing, and you add back in the cost of decoupling, the cost of the public benefits funds, these other sort of costs that frequently get bandied around, the average bill impact has decreased here in Helco 10.3% over roughly the past 5 years, just because we're purchasing less electricity than we ever needed before. If you look sort of going forward, projected forecast of how much rooftop solar will play a part in the infrastructure, this is a projection by Rocky Mountain Institute. The green basically being more and more rooftop solar, you can just sort of see where the projections are and where our power will come from in the future, particularly paired with storage. So fundamentally, this is kind of a wonky graph, but I think what this is really trying to show is we really do have two futures in front of us. Clearly, customers will have rooftop solar and storage, and it's just how interconnected they'll be with the grid. Either you're going to have sort of an integrated grid where these customers are going to be able to provide services back to the utility, back to other ratepayers. So instead of having a peaker plant, you ask 1,000 of these storage systems to kick in and provide power for the 5 to 10 minutes you might need it. And then they get these trendy terms to call them prosumers. These prosumers essentially get compensated a little bit for doing that, but the net effect is it's a lot cheaper than having to build say, $1 billion peaker plant. The idea is it's an integrated grid where there's sort of the back and forth where ratepayers see an advantage no longer having to build some of these expensive capital-intensive items, and the consumers sort of get a benefit for being sort of a good community neighbor. Or you're going to start seeing a situation where people will start doing more grid defection, taking their loads off of the grid and sort of saying, I'll just go ahead and generate it myself. And again, generally speaking, at Sunrun, sort of our view is really you want to see sort of smart home management in a way where the consumers don't really have to think about it very much, but basically signals from the grid will happen. You'll automatically have things like your water heater will turn on or off in a way where you really won't ever notice, but in a way where it benefits the grid and benefits everybody. And you have an ability for your electric vehicle, for your solar system, for your air conditioning, for your water heater, et cetera, to really be able to talk to one another, again, in a way it's transparent, but in a way it benefits the grid the most and yourself. And then again, I don't think we fully imagine what all the possibilities are. These are some examples where, inventions were created for one sort of concept, and then sort of what happened later really was quite a bit different. And I really do kind of look forward to, boring my children, 20 years from now about how the way things used to be, but now that we have all this great clean energy, how things have changed and transformed. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
I've been bypassed.
I think you're following.
Oh, okay.
Is this mic on? Okay.
You don't have a presentation, though, so you can just talk. Oh, okay.
Do you have a presentation?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Henry, go ahead.
No, no.
Henry.
Aloha? It's on? Excellent. Well, it's clear that Hawaii is a leader in renewable energy. We don't have a cable to a mainland grid. We don't have massive rivers. But through solar and wind, we've had great penetration levels that are unrivaled around the world. It's clear the world is in the middle of a revolution, but Hawaii is clearly at the cutting edge of that revolution. And we can thank the legislature, we can thank the marketplace, we can thank energy providers, we can thank energy stakeholders, and thank you for the media for covering this. I want to focus not on only the positives, but some of the things that we need to work on. Often, there are statements thrown out which, when you stop and think about them, they're really intriguing. One of them is a Helco statement that in order for the Hawaiian electric companies to reach 100% renewable energy by 2045, Helco will reach 209%. That is, 209% of the total energy produced on this island will come from renewable energy. And when that balances with the fact that on Oahu we'll have less than 100%, on average the islands will be at 100% renewable. And you might ask, how can anybody produce more than twice as much electricity from renewables than all? And that's because only in Hawaii, as far as we've been able to calculate, has the meaning of percentage disagreed with what you learn in high school algebra as a value between 0 and 100. So those are some of the strange things that we have to work on. Another one is that renewable energy will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That certainly sounds great. It's something we hear all the time. But for example, if you were to take the Amazon rainforest and just level it, burn down the whole thing, not use any of the wood, just burn it all down. Put a parking lot over half of it, and put bioenergy crops on the other half, genetically engineered monocropping on the other half to turn it into biodiesel, and then you were to send it by rocket ship to all the countries of the world. That would be renewable energy under the Kyoto Protocol, Waxman-Markey, the European Cap and Trade, and Hawaii's RPS law. Clearly, most people would not think that to be renewable energy. Certainly, that would release massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. But it's something that, well, it started in a little more than 10 years ago. A little more than 10 years ago, some companies said to Hawaii, why don't we build ethanol plants here? Hawaiian Electric said, wow, we could power our generators with ethanol. We could jumpstart Hawaii's agricultural industry. The legislature passed a law that said no matter how bioenergy is produced, no matter how it is produced, it is 100% renewable by law. No ethanol company came. We don't have any ethanol plants. We now required for many years that gasoline have 10% ethanol in it, but that was all imported ethanol. And we know that ethanol has devastated areas of the ocean from massive runoff from growing corn to simply turn it into ethanol. But that is one example of a place we have to change the law. Another one is, let's see, renewable energy will reduce prices. We heard that when the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative passed in 2008, even though the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative said in it, use renewables and the prices will go up in the short term. They've now reached the point, as Isaac and Robert have shown, where they're now cheaper. But the things we passed actually said there would be a rise and then a fall, and that was not carefully explained to people who then felt, why didn't prices fall immediately? One of the interesting proposals now is to burn logs in Pepeakeo, at the former Hilo Coast Power Company. The idea is that you would chop down full-grown trees in Pahala. You would put them on trucks. You would ship the trucks 70 miles to Pepeakeo. You would put it in a furnace and burn it to produce electricity. And you would replace the trees with saplings. And because it comes from agriculture, it has no impact on greenhouse gas emissions. That's the proposal by Huhonua in Pepeakeo. And the idea is, because they are jump-starting agriculture on this island, we should pay them a premium higher than any other utility generator in this state. We should give them a bonus for promoting agriculture. That is the proposal currently being debated by the Public Utilities Commission. Last month, Civil Beat and the Hawaii State Public Library held a forum at the Manoa Public Library. And Stacy Aldridge, who's the state librarian, said, wouldn't it be nice if every person took one news story a week and simply challenged it in their own mind, figured out why it might not be true? It sort of reminded me of Star Trek. I'm of that generation. The Star Trek quote from Star Trek Enterprise is, challenge your preconceptions or they'll challenge you. We should all look at the assumptions that we use and challenge them on a regular basis. We need to make sure that the renewable energy that we're using actually decreases greenhouse gas emissions, that it actually lowers costs, and it actually promotes community. One of the issues coming up now are microgrids, about whether we should have a highly centralized utility making all the decisions, or whether we need to really disperse energy generation. And I've heard the utilities argument, which is, you know, let's say you follow Isaac and Robert and you put in solar on your roof and you put in a lot of energy efficiency units and you put in a storage device. And what happens if it's repeated that we have 43 days of rain? 43 days of cloud and rain, and what happens if everybody's battery stops having enough energy? We need the centralized grid. Of course, then you look at Sweden, which led the idea of putting in energy storage systems below pavement. You put in an energy storage system, you put in pavement, you drive a bus on it, the storage system has an induction field, the energy is transferred through the induction field to the battery in the bus, and the bus gains energy as it's driving down the lane, and therefore you don't need wires. And all electric vehicles could be powered simply by driving down streets. And if for some reason your battery is running low, you just take your electric vehicle for a spin, bring it back to the house, and recharge your battery. Different places are experimenting with that. Imagine if there was energy like that underneath sidewalks. You wouldn't have to pay the kid next door to shovel the snow. Of course, we don't have that problem here. But the idea that we are looking at a revolution that is fundamentally changing everything. I was told recently that cell phones have become so universal that 97% of the world's population has them. I'm sure that number is a bit off. It takes into the fact that Noel here has 3 electric vehicles. I know a number of people who have 2 cell phones, so probably it's not 97%, but it is an astronomical number in just a matter of a couple days that have transformed the world telecommunication industry. And the solar industry is coming right behind that, and the energy storage industry is coming right behind that. And the technology is changing so rapidly that when somebody tells us that whatever happens, the grid will be here in 50 years, the utility will be here in 50 years, question assumptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So first of all, thank you very much for having me this evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the welcome, Bill. As mentioned earlier, I'm with the Big Island Electric Vehicle Association. For those of you who are not very familiar, it's a grassroots volunteer organization, and we're purely about educating the community about the benefits of EVs. Our mission is simple, and that is to increase the number of electric vehicles on the island. That obviously will translate into a reduction in our dependence on fossil energy, but it's very specific. It's about getting more electric cars on the road. As I go through this next few minutes here, I hope that it'll be clear to you why that's so important. There are not that many electric car owners here, so I'll spend a moment here just explaining what an electric car or electric vehicle is. If you see this image here, everything that's in red represents what you'll find in a traditional gasoline-powered vehicle. You've got the engine, you've got the power, you've got the drive shaft, you've got the exhaust system, you've got the gas tank. In an electric car, that's all replaced with a battery, an electric motor, maybe 2, maybe 4, and an inverter to convert the energy that you have in the battery to something that can be used by the motor. This setup is a lot more simple. It's a lot more efficient, and it leads to a lot of benefits that I'd like to share with you now. So the very first one is the environment. There are several environmental benefits with electric vehicles. There are no tailpipe emissions. I mean, there's not a tailpipe to begin with. It's also very efficient. You can research this and find that even in communities where the grid is not clean, right, like communities where the grid is powered by coal, electric cars, because of their efficiency, is still a lot better than a gasoline vehicle. I guess a good way to explain that is the heat that you feel with a regular car that comes out of the exhaust, that comes out of the motor. That's wasted energy. With an electric car, most of the energy that you have in the battery is used. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is total cost of ownership. With an electric vehicle, there's very little maintenance. We have a 2011 Nissan Leaf, and it's got 60,000 miles on it. The only thing we've had to do with it was replace the tires and the wiper blades. So the fact that you don't have a lot of moving parts, there's no oil to change, there's no transmission to deal with, just translates into a much lower cost of ownership. When you couple an EV with solar production, solar power, it gets even greater, right? Just imagine being able to drive your vehicle utilizing power that you've harvested from the sun. It's the most ideal situation, and many are already doing it. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is the driving experience. How many of you have actually ridden or driven in an EV? So you'll probably appreciate this, the fact that it's so quiet, it's so smooth, there's no vibration from a motor, there's no noise from a motor, and the acceleration and the performance is superior. You've got instant access to the torque that's available in the system. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is home charging. One can perceive this as maybe a disadvantage, but if you really think about it, it's no different from your mobile phone. You'd come home, you plug it in, you've topped it off, the next time you're ready to use it, it's ready to go. The same thing is applicable with an electric vehicle. We get home, we plug it in, the next time we're ready for the car, it's powered up. And the benefit, of course, is you're not having to go to a gas station, right? Deal with fumes, deal with the pump, deal with lines. And the last thing is probably very fleeting. There are a lot of incentives that we see today to help with the adoption of electric vehicles. Free parking at county facilities, free parking at the airport, low to no-cost charging at the Hilo Target, I'm sure here as well. Home Depot, they don't charge for you to plug in. Helco's got fast charging, flat rate of about $8. So if you have a large battery pack, you can hang out there for several minutes, maybe about an hour, maybe realistically, and you've got 200 miles of range for maybe $8. So there are a lot of benefits for electric vehicles, and once you've purchased one or driven one, there's really no turning back. Now, I would like to address concerns, right? To be realistic, there are concerns. There are a number of perceptions out there. Price is a consideration. The Tesla Model S and Model X, they start at around $70,000. It's clearly not for everybody. But as you will see shortly, that's quickly changing. Another thing that's really important to take into consideration is range anxiety. That's essentially the fear of running out of juice and getting stranded. It's going to be less of an issue with the EVs that are coming out. And then lastly, infrastructure for public chargers. This is becoming less and less of an issue for a number of reasons. One, we're seeing more of them. But more importantly, with the new EVs that are coming out, you'll have higher mileage, higher range, and with that, there's going to be less of a need to have to charge while you're out and about. This is a very interesting graphic from Bloomberg publication, and it essentially demonstrates the adoption of electric cars, what we're anticipating here. By 2030, we'll have 20 million units on the road, and we're seeing by 2040, the percentage of new cars that will be sold being EVs dramatically increasing compared to what we have today. So electric vehicles are here to stay. Let's talk about what's happening here in Hawaii. Now, as I was looking through the material about electric vehicles in Hawaii, I learned that the very first EV that arrived in Oahu was very likely an electric vehicle, and this was way back in 1899. Really amazing that the very first vehicle was an electric. As of the end of last year, there were about 5,000 electric vehicles statewide. Hawaii is second per capita in terms of electric vehicle adoption, second to California. And on our island here, as of late last year, about 250 EVs. But we're seeing a rapid growth. So that was 20% over the previous year. Now, once again, I'm hinting at change that's about to come with the new EVs that are coming about. Bill shared this with me. He actually inserted this. It's really fascinating. It kind of highlights the trajectory of growth, EV growth here in Hawaii. From 2009 to 2016, the green bar represents the number of EVs. And the bar at the top, all passenger vehicles. So just looking at the growth highlights the importance, but also the fact that consumer behavior is changing and demand is rising. If you're wondering what can you get in Hawaii, there are many choices. There are certain ones that stand out, like the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt, the Chevy Volt, Tesla Model X, Model S, and soon the Model 3. So there are a number of these vehicles that can be purchased on the islands today. In the future, we see even more, right? So you see here, try not to read it, just take a look at the number of images you see there, from trucks to sports cars, sedans, hatchbacks. Almost every form of transportation, you'll start to see electrification. The important thing to note, though, is what you see on the right side of the screen, vehicles with over 200-mile range. And the reason why that's important is because it starts to address concerns about range anxiety. It starts to address concerns about availability of charging stations. And the other dimension to this is the prices are coming down. So the Model 3, the Chevy Bolt, will be in the 30,000 range. When you add on the tax incentives, that can be in the low 30,000. So what we're also seeing now is that we're arriving at price parity, where you have a gasoline vehicle and an electric vehicle, similar size, coming to a very similar price point. And when you add on the cost advantages with maintenance, et cetera, the cost difference is even more pronounced. So I'd like to spend just a moment now talking about what this means, right? I want to flip through the animation here. So with the lower price, long-range EVs, we're bound to see, it's inevitable, that we're going to see a lot more EVs on the road. And the big question is, what does that mean in terms of the grid? What does that mean in terms of the demand for electricity? Clearly, it's going to be there. And if we observe patterns, we see that people will come home from work and they'll plug in. And if you have a ton of that happening, the question is that sustainable? Are there things that we're going to need to do to mitigate issues? And of course, there's going to be the increased urgency for us to shift towards renewable energy. The last thing I'd like to say here is that there are things, again, just to reiterate, there are things that we have to start to do today, right? From a utility perspective, and a number of these things were discussed tonight, there are things that we need to figure out, because the way we do things today is not going to be enough. It's not going to be sustainable, and it's actually going to create problems for us if we don't proactively address them. So we've got to figure out how to deal with the spike in electricity demand. There are many different ways to go about that. We also need to take a look at, from a utility perspective, what needs to be done for us to increase enable the transition, rapid transition to renewables and leverage storage. And then finally, from a consumer perspective, we already talked about what can be done at home, but I also would like to say that there's also education from a consumer perspective in terms of how we deal with our electric vehicles. Charging at night is probably not the best thing to do, and if you have a 200, 300-mile range EV, there are many other opportunities to charge, and things like that we're going to have to start to adapt and learn and apply. With that, I'll say that electric vehicles are just one, it's a means to an end. There are many other things that we talked about here tonight that are going to be critical for us to be able to move forward. And this is not about today. This is about creating a sustainable reality for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Bill, very much, and everybody for showing up, and Representative Lowen, thank you for showing up as well. Great to see you again. So I'm Jose Dezan. I'm with Parker Ranch. Before I get started, wanted to add, Bill was really gracious with his bio. I did spend about 22 years with the utility, 4 years as a general manager of Helco. So I do want to give kudos to the linemen, the customer service folks, power plant folks that keep the lights on. I think they do a really great job. They work really hard, and they try to be flexible and creative and sympathetic to the changes, but you got to understand that they got to follow the rules. So what I hope to do in my time here at Parker Ranch at Pine Hill Power is to change those rules, make them more, just to unleash their creativity and our collective creativity overall in the energy field. Parker Ranch has been around for 170 years. We're typically between the 5th and 9th largest active cattle ranch in the nation, and people always scratch their head and go, really? In Hawaii? But we are. We own 130,000 acres of land, and the last Parker, Richard Palmer Smart, left the ranch to a beneficial trust to benefit the North Hawaii Community Hospital, Hawaii Prep Academy, the Parker School, and the Hawaii Community Foundation, basically the community. So I work not for stockholders or shareholders, I work for the community. We have two initiatives going on right now. One is our Panilo Cattle Company, where we're trying to bring some of that beef back, or not bring back, but keep it here on the island. And so we have what we think is a good grass-fed product, a local product. It's all about how you finish the cattle, and I think we've got some pretty good consistency. We're in some of the restaurants now and in the Safeways, so you could find our product there. I run Pine Hill Power Company, and my job is to unlock the renewable energy potential at Parker Ranch to pursue projects that benefit not just the town that grew around Parker Ranch, but the entire island as well. And ultimately, I'd like to address the agriculture, energy, and water nexus. So to give you an idea of what the resources are at Parker Ranch, we have like some of the best winds in the world. Class 7 out of 7. Very consistent, very windy, and a lot of it, a lot of that type of wind is in Waimea, North Kahala. We have a lot of solar potential as well. The area in red is just the area across the street from the Waimea Airport all the way down to near the coast. But terrific solar potential. And we have pump storage hydro. Does anyone not know what pump storage hydro is? Okay, just really quickly, you have, in this case, 2 reservoirs of water, 2 pools of water. Water, let's say, it starts in the lower reservoir. What happens is the utility, when the grid becomes hard to manage from their standpoint, they back off the wind and the solar, not the rooftop guys, but the larger intermittent wind units and solar. Instead of backing them off, you could use them to just pump water up a hill. And so you're still operating with renewable energy. You pump that water up the hill, and then during the evening peak, or soon to be evening and morning peak, you can release that water instead of starting up the expensive peaking units and create electricity just by having water flow up and down, up and down. There's several ways to do it. One is to have the drawing on the right shows an upper reservoir with a stream or river. We're advocating just 2 individual reservoirs, like the picture on the bottom right. So that's how pump storage work. We have found areas on the ranch that we think is very good potential for pump storage, and trying to be really aggressive at developing that. Here's an example of a pump storage plant in wind at El Hierro in the Canary Islands. El Hierro used to be run by all diesel generators, and now they have, the town is off to the right there, upper right. Now they're using wind and pump storage hydro to power the entire town, and the diesel generators are just their backup now. What's also good, what we want to do is those upper reservoirs are great for agriculture. So we want to expand our reservoirs just like they have for agriculture, and we would use it for pasture irrigation, drought mitigation, row crop farming. So tremendous potential with pump storage hydro that you can't do with batteries. As a matter of fact, what I tell people is if there's a battery fire, you just dip your helicopter bucket into the pump storage reservoir and put that fire out. So, but we love batteries. You know. In 2013, 2014, when energy prices are really high, the ranch was worried about cattle business in that we pump a lot of water for cattle, and that pumping costs were so expensive that it was wiping out the margins on cattle operations on the Mauna Kea side of the ranch, to the point where we were considering closing down half the ranch. It's something you don't want to do when you've been in business for 100, 170 years. So we engaged Siemens and Booz Allen and Pace Global, which is a subsidiary of Siemens, to help us understand and gain control of the energy picture. We thought that we have to start advocating for ourselves as landowners to control energy. And of course, we couldn't do that just for us. Again, we had to do that for the town of Waimea and North Kahala as well. And you might have read or heard about our microgrid project or recommendation in 2014. That was back when the HELCO IRP Integrated Resource Plan came out, and they were projecting power at $1 a kilowatt hour, which basically means we would all be paying $500 to $700 a month for electricity. And there's no way, you guys, fixed income businesses like us can stay afloat. So we had to take action, and the microgrid basically showed that you could invest $400 to $600 million quickly in renewable energy, and the secondary and tertiary effect of that would be about $1 billion benefit to GDP for the island. So immediate benefit. We took that to the utility to explain what was going on. They said, if you do that, if you carve out the entire north part of the island, the other customers in Kona Hilo are going to pay for that. And we said, well, your net book value of generation is about $200 million. We'll give you $200 million. That's more than enough to cover your needs and everyone else's needs. So everyone wins. We win up in the north, and of course, everyone else wins as well. The problem with the regional microgrid that we looked at, not a problem, but one of the hurdles we had to deal with was, do we build our own transmission lines or do we use the utilities? Obviously, it's more efficient to use the utilities, but they wouldn't do that. That's called wheeling, and I'll talk about what we did in order to, what we're doing because of that. The commission rejected the integrated resource plan and told the utility to come up with another plan. Ultimately, they came up with 4. But this is the second one they came up with. And when they came up with their plan, we said, can we do better? And the answer is yes. So we then looked at how, if the benefits to Waimea and North Kahala were so great, can we provide benefits to the entire island? The answer was clearly yes. We came up with a plan that we tried to share at the Power Supply Improvement Plan docket. That's a resource planning docket. And it eventually got recognized by the utility and by the commission. Just give you an example, and this is where we're playing with fuzzy math with renewable portfolio standards. The HELCO PSIP back in 2014 showed 92% renewable RPS, great, with a 27% reduction in cost. And we came up with 106% renewable. They did it over 20 years, we can do it in 10. So again, it's an acceleration of investment in renewable energy, and a quick acceleration of the retirement of fossil units can provide economic benefits to this island. So we've done 2 studies that showed you can do it. In 2016, by the way, so the commission didn't like that plan either. In 2016, the utility came up with their latest plan, and it was a result of the commission actually forcing the utility to work with the other parties, and I think this plan is better than the other 2. What's really missing is things that have happened in the near term. One is the utilities attempt to purchase the Hamakua energy plant in Pepe in Hamakua, 60 megawatt plant there, and then Huhonua, that showed up again, and so that's not in the plan. And then the retirement of older generation. HELCO has a lot of diesel generators that in 2045 are going to be 76 to 80 years old. So you got to do something about those. You can't wait till the end. Pineapple Power came up with a 3-pronged strategy. One is to demonstrate the value of an alternative microgrid and island-wide solutions, which we did, and then develop a compelling plan to do that, which we did, and then advocate for policy and regulatory frameworks to the PUC and others. So We've been involved in the legislature trying to change the business model or trying to promote wheeling to get the microgrid concept going. We've also participated in the Next Era Energy merger, successful, not us, but ultimately was rejected by the commission. The Power Supply Improvement Plan docket, which got our resources recognized, and then we were, as Isaac said, intervened in the HEP purchase docket, which we were against, and the commission agreed with that. So what's next for this island? Well, for all islands, but this island in particular, the utility submitted a request for the commission to issue an RFP, request for proposals for more generation, renewable. But we had Helco trying to buy the fossil plant, Hamakua Energy Partners, and also Huhanua, which I'm not going to talk about anymore because Henry and Isaac talked about that already. The ag preferential rate issue is going to come up, and it's up to the commission to decide. So I'll talk about what's possible. Technology disruption favors smaller distributed power plants. We're seeing that. I mean, rooftop solar and batteries, neighborhood microgrids. I still think that some sort of utility scale generation, not at the huge magnitude, but bigger than neighborhoods, will still be necessary for larger integrated energy districts, and really for those that cannot afford or choose not to participate in distributed energy, whoever those may be. And while I think that the utility is trying hard to meet their needs of the customers, their regulatory and legislative mandates with their existing vertically integrated business model, I think if you turn it on its head, you could say that the existing utility business model could be limiting our renewable energy and economic potential, and that other business models should be explored. Here's an example of the grid right now where the electricity use is split equally between the Hilo side and Kona side, but most of the generation is on the Hilo side. So there's a net flow of power from Hilo to Kona over 4 cross-island lines. Imagine if you could generate a lot of that energy with non-combustible wind, PV, and pump storage hydro to firm it all up and have that power distribute to all the other areas, reducing transmission losses, removing non-economic must-run requirements by the utility, et cetera. It's an all-island-wide solution, maximizing the use of the island's natural resources. And in a scenario where the business model were to change, and it's not a vertically integrated utility, but let's say a competitive environment, wholesale or retail, Parker Ranch could be providing balancing and regulation services to the grid. And one of my favorites, of course, is the integrated energy district or the microgrid, where you divide up the island into different grids. You do that for resiliency. So the Parker Ranch microgrid, perhaps on the top, would be a net generator to all the other microgrids. But in the event of a hurricane or tropical storm, each microgrid would hunker down and provide their own power island, basically. And then after that, everyone comes back on. So in this case, the utility could be a wires company, which I think would be a good way for the utility to move to. So in summary, I think the acceleration of significant investment in renewable energy while increasing retirement of fossil fuels will improve our GDP on this island. I think that the current business model may be an economic hindrance, and we should be exploring different business models for our utilities in general, given the technology disruption. Competitive business models may be more efficient from a customer perspective, and what we are doing now at Parker Ranch Panhandle Power is really trying to identify that ideal partner that could develop all of those renewable energy resources on the ranch to benefit all customers on the island. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. I appreciate it. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to utilize the last half of our forum to take your questions. And if you need a 3x5 card, Jane and Pam have cards there, so just put your hand up and we'll make sure you get one. While we're doing that, I'm going to just present to the panel one of the questions that came in through our website in ahead of this evening's proceedings. And it's a very basic one, and I want to just go on down the line, starting with Isaac, to each of you, and it's as follows. What do you see as the biggest hurdle standing between people of Hawaii and lower cost green energy? Now, I don't know what they mean by green energy, but we'll assume that they're in keeping with tonight's definition of green energy.
The legacy, utility, business, and regulatory system, which is to say, just the way we've been producing, selling, managing, regulating our electricity for the last 100+ years. So Hawaii, like the rest of the nation, has been under this system, which really worked for what I call the industrial age, where you're just building big plants and building your economy against an era of constant growth and unlimited oil and no regrets as far as in the environment. And that really, built this wonderful wonder of the world of the modern electric grid for us, but has come with all kinds of baggage in terms of environment and now climate impacts that we need to reckon with at this point. So it was this constant grow, constant spend, build model that is no longer in sync with what we need for our clean energy future. And so, everyone's talking about this now, and I think there's growing acceptance of the need to create a new system that moves beyond this way we build more, the utility builds more to profit more, and instead assuming we have a for-profit utility running the grid to begin with, find a way that we can have that utility make money to do what we want, which is maximize clean energy for the environment and the climate.
As always, Isaac's really eloquent, and I fully agree, maybe just putting it in slightly different words. I often think of the telecommunication industry a bit. You have a situation where radical change is happening, and utilities, by the way they're regulated, aren't exactly encouraged to be flexible, innovative, or entrepreneurial. But the telecommunication industry is kind of a good example where we had sort of a transformation from the traditional landline model to sort of a cell phone model. And you saw utilities in that situation, AT&T, the Bells, et cetera, essentially adopt and start becoming cell phone providers, and in some ways are worth more now than they were previously as a landline. And I think it's a good example of just shifting a business model, shifting, readily acknowledging there's differences and readily acknowledging that might have been an easier transformation. But I think we're in a similar situation where the way utilities get paid has to change. In a way where they're sort of incentivized to sort of move this model. And again, I think that winds up benefiting everybody to try to realign those levers.
I'm going to take the question slightly differently. Assuming through hurricanes, tsunamis, and earthquakes, the entire system is wiped out, but nobody is hurt. And we have enough money up front to rebuild the entire thing. Would we rebuild what we have, or would we build something different? And I think for 100 years ago, it made much sense to do what we did, but now we would do three things differently. First, we would have a DC system, not an alternating current system. DC would make far more sense with the technology that we have now. Second, it would be far more distributed. We would not be centralized utility. And third, and the hardest, is the uncertainty. We're in the middle of a vast transformation. Suppose this had happened a couple years ago and all the lights had been replaced with CFLs, only to realize that LEDs are the way forward.
I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to also take the question slightly different, and instead of focusing on production, I'd like to answer it from the perspective of consumption. And I feel like something that might be getting in the way, and something that can hopefully be easily addressed, is just awareness, public awareness, right? So it's not about just producing energy to be able to have, it's not just about producing energy, it's also about what we consume. ensuring that we're not wasteful, ensuring that the choices that we make as consumers, that they're also very mindful of waste or the need to avoid waste. So, consume less and you'll need less of the energy produced. Couple that with better energy and you have a better environment, better situation. Thank you.
I think the technology disruption is going to also require a regulatory disruption. Isaac mentioned that a little bit. We just have to change the way we've been doing things. I think a controlled transition is going to just lead to more confusion, and it'll always lag the technical disruption. So regulatory hurdles need to be changed. The utility, it would be great if the utility could lead this, but their hands are tied. They like what they have. Right now, they're used to that, but just the entire revolution in the electricity business world and regulation needs to change.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've been asked if you, Henry, could define the difference between alternating current and direct current, and I'm going to put a spin on that question as you do define those two types of electricity, and that is, it is a challenge with PV panels that generate direct current and then, of course, go through an inverter to then turn it into alternating current for everything, all of our appliances and everything we plug in the wall. How's the efficiency improved in terms of addressing that? Basically, there is some energy loss, there's some energy expense to doing that transition from DC to AC. First explain DC AC and then tell me what you know about any new developments in that area.
I would put it in extremely simplistic terms that direct current is simply a beam. Alternating current is like a wave. Tesla and Westinghouse favored alternating current because it could move electricity much further. Direct current was extremely limited in terms it dissipated very quickly. Edison was in favor of direct current. Edison was very popular, so we went with the Westinghouse and Tesla model, but we called all our utilities Edisons. If we were to ship power between even Maui and Oahu, it would make far more sense to do a direct current cable, which is what the utility proposed at one time, or bringing power from Hawaii Island to Maui through an undersea cable. It's much more efficient with a direct current, but you need $200 million structures at each end to convert from DC to AC.
Thank you. Noel, range anxiety. I know you touched on this, but if you could elaborate a little bit, and that is, when will we likely see greater range? In this sense, going to Kona to Hilo to Kona back again could be a stretch of 200-mile range.
Yeah, if the question is when, it's already here. The Chevy Bolt, and if we're talking about reasonably priced electric vehicles, because if you consider the Tesla already goes over 250. It can also, in some models, you can actually go 300 miles, right? So those long-range EVs exist. The question is, when will reasonably priced long-range EVs come to market? The Chevy Bolt, which should be widely available in August, goes close to 240 miles, and that is with the tax incentives in the 30,000 range, low 30,000 range. Tesla Model 3 is coming out as well, and that's also well over 200 miles, and also in the 30,000 range. So to the answer to the question when, it's imminent. It's happening now.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you for a minute because I have several of EV questions here, and we'll just try to get these out of the way. Why isn't the body of electric vehicles have solar panels built into them? I do know, by example, the Fisker Karma did have a solar roof on it as an option. Of course, that car never really got beyond 50 in production or something.
Yeah, it's physics. I mean, to be able to produce enough electricity to charge the battery on an electric vehicle, you just don't have enough surface area on the vehicle itself, right? So there are some, the Nissan Leaf has a small solar panel on the spoiler, right, on the roof, but it's used to charge a 12-volt battery, which is used for the electronics. There's just not enough surface area to produce to gather enough energy to charge the car.
And using Robert's graph where he showed the little red lines popping up at the top, when you turn on a system, you need a sudden jolt of energy. The PV panel is not going to do that.
Okay. So when we talk about agriculture, EVs have been very slow to make a penetration in agricultural applications like farm equipment, heavy machinery. And there's some distinct challenges for that, although I do know, as you know, that Tesla is working on an 18-wheeler, all-EV tractor-trailer. So do you know anything about farm equipment applications?
Not farm equipment application specifically, but when we think about the form factors that exist, right? So we talk about the various vehicle types that we showed earlier. What we didn't display were things like garbage trucks, buses, the freight trucks that you just described. So the technology is readily available to be applied to different applications. I think it's just a question of time. One interesting thing is that there is I can't think of the name of the model right now, the manufacturer, but there is actually an electric riding lawnmower. So if you can extrapolate that to something much larger, it's feasible. I think it's just a question of demand and a company that's willing to produce it.
And I believe LA Harbor is experimenting with electric vehicles for loading and unloading ships.
Great, thank you. Now this is going to go down the panel again. As power production increasingly decentralizes, moving from fuel-powered electric centers to solar-powered homes, it begs the question, what will happen with the grid? Is it in HELCO, HECO power companies' interest to hold onto the grid? Start in, yeah, God, that's a good one.
In the middle.
Jose.
Okay. You could make an argument that there's still a role for the utility, and that role would be in a wires company capacity where they would be responsible for the transmission and distribution lines that go to each of our homes if those homes need them. But then the entire generation piece is going to be controlled autonomously, whether through the market or what. Let's say I have a huge PV system and battery in my house, and I'm going on vacation for a month. I'm going on a cruise in the Riviera. I don't need that power. I can make that power available to sell to the grid for anyone else that might want to use that power, and I could probably offer it at a cheap price because I'm not trying to make money on it. You know, so there's things like that that can happen that's not going to happen with the existing business model.
To add to that,
Brought that business model has been based historically on power generation as a primary revenue source for utilities and not power management. Is that right?
Exactly. It's the centralized generation, centralized vertically integrated utility model where everything is done with big power plants at the utility.
Well, what you just described was what I was attempting to describe, and that is maybe a shift towards management, right? So you've got technology today that should allow an entity to understand when there is oversupply demand at a very micro level, right? Maybe at the point of the EV or at the point of the home, and somehow layering technology on top of what we have today to be able to balance supply and demand intelligently might be an opportunity.
Part of the issue comes down to the example I used with CFLs before, that we build systems that have a life expectancy. And if we build a really smart grid, it has a life expectancy. And the question is, will a smart grid become obsolete during its life or after it or before? So that is one fundamental issue. The second one is cybersecurity. We've already seen examples, both tests in the United States, a physical attack on a substation in San Jose in California, and a computer attack in Eastern Europe, where you can knock out part of the grid, either through terrorism or through cyber attacks. On Oahu, the military at Fort Shafter brought in hacking teams, 2 different teams. One team is on the outside trying to penetrate their system. The other one is given the keys to get inside their system, and once inside, figuring out whether they can destroy the system from inside. Then you have other teams monitoring them to try to stop them. Then you have another team that's monitoring both sides and advising both sides to get both sides up to speed on what the other side's doing, and you have another team monitoring the whole thing to record it. So you have the military testing how secure the grid is. You only need one accident on the U.S. continent. The U.S. continent of 48 states, Southern California, Southern Canada, and Northern Mexico is 3 grids. One grid goes down, you can wipe out a vast section of the United States. When the San Jose substation was knocked out, it was knocked out for 28 days. They still don't know who did it. So the question is, one, how many billions should we sink into a centralized smart grid when A, it might become obsolete, and 2, it might be vulnerable to a cyber attack? Those are very complex issues that nobody right now knows, but there are a lot of consultants making a lot of money who will tell you what the solution is.
I think somewhat echoing prior speakers, I think the answer to the question is we don't know because the technology is evolving so quickly. I was just engaged in a discussion with somebody who's very knowledgeable, who was talking a lot about concepts about base load power and things 5 years ago, everybody would have nodded. But today, those questions, those issues are even somewhat no longer even relevant because the technology shifted so quickly. Today, when we install the Sunrun Brightbox system, it's a solar plus storage, we have the capability of controlling individual units within the home, so we can actually shut stuff on and off. Again, this is with the customer's choice and election, but in a way where they will never really notice the impact, but able to modulate it, able to regulate supply and demand within the home, and again, respond to just about any grid service that's needed. So if frequency starts to change, these systems are able to respond and actually help and assist. Again, I think the general answer is we just don't know, and we're just seeing maybe the tip of sort of what's evolving and changing. I'd also suggest the question may change depending where you are. Here on this island, where you have a lot of expense and transmission lines, it may make sense, like was referenced before, more of a microgrid kind of situation. That grid may look very different than a grid in Honolulu, for example. And so we don't know, and again, I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis to some extent. I guess the one final thing I'd add, and kind of echoing what Henry said, that if I were a regulator looking at a proposal from a utility for sort of an expensive investment, I'd be very cautious in approving it. Because I'd be really concerned. If you just look at the load, it's been dropping steadily here in Hawaii over the past 5 to 6 years. I'd be really concerned about spending money on anything really expensive or large, that it's just going to become a boondoggle that somebody else is going to have to pay for later, and take a much more cautious approach about sort of saying, let's see what the market can do and see what the market's doing.
Yeah, so everything that everyone else said. But Robert touched on a key point in the utility industry right now, which is the huge gorilla of risk. And like I said, the traditional business model for the utility was to just build these massive infrastructure, and then because people kept on using more and more energy, you just spread that cost, across the whole customer base, and everything was hunky-dory or whatever through economies of scale and what have you. But is that top-down monopoly model just, basically too slow, too big, especially in the face of disruptive technological change? I think that's like the number one threat here and the concern that are keeping these utility executives awake, right, Jose? But yeah, what's the role for the utility? I think, people have described it. There's terms, grid integrator, network operator, market facilitator. There's definitely a role of a coordinator function like that to make sure we maximize all the synergies. But as Jose's PowerPoint pointed out, this traditional function of utility owning everything, generation and the delivery, really puts them in a very awkward position when it comes to customers' producing their own energy, or microgrid communities forming, taking care of their own energy needs. There's just a conflict there, and we see it over and over again. 10 years of doing this, I mean, the utility is just looking out for its own interests, and there's just a conflict that cannot be denied, where they want to preserve their legacy fossil fuel generation business, and people are getting in the way of that, and so the utility gets in the way of them. We just need to eliminate those biases.
Jose, tell me, since you're the one with the most experience in this area, so I'm setting you up for this question, as you can see. How efficient is pump storage, say kilowatt hour in, kilowatt hour out? Is it 1-to-1? Is it 50, 60? How would you?
It's about traditionally about 80%. If you move to a Pelton turbine, you can probably get up to about 85, 88%. So the technology actually is improving as well on pump storage, and that's pretty good.
That's very good.
A fossil-fired unit is about 36%. Obviously, solar battery is way up there.
I want to point out one thing about efficiency. The sun beating down on an agricultural field producing crops for you to eat, 0.1% efficient, 1 part in 1,000 efficient, and yet I think we all want that to continue.
Yeah, actually, I totally echo what Henry's saying, and maybe from a different point of view. In some ways, the efficiency doesn't matter. We need to create a situation where renewable energy, so across the United States, we waste over a third of the energy or more is just wasted in the form of spinning reserve. You have power plants sitting around basically saying, I'm ready to produce energy if you need it, and I'm operating. And we essentially don't use those. We need to create a situation where renewable energy can be in the same form. And there's examples of that, and go into specific examples. But basically, we want things like pump storage, or even just a load bank where you're able to, or other storage forms where you just dump energy and just tell all the renewable energy providers, operate, go. And we can basically handle and modulate all of your energy, and the intermittency problem goes away to some extent. A quick example, you have electricity being generated. Well, the best example, you have a proposal recently in Tucson, and these numbers still need some verification, but they're saying 4.5 cents to produce solar and store it in storage, 4.5 cents per kilowatt. It's astonishingly cheap. Just to give you, a comparison, average electric bill here is 32 cents on this island, roughly. Just to show you, and you have just solar alone, being able to come in at 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt. You're going to say all those providers just turn it on, and we'll put it in storage. Even if it's not efficient, that's okay. It just allows us to have all the solar going on all the time, and then again, we be able to get some of that back. So efficiency is sort of, doesn't matter, it's cost.
Okay. Let's go back to cost a bit. Ultimately, EVs, that electric vehicles come with manufacturer warranties on the battery systems of 10 years. I know I own 2 of them, you know, and the manufacturers, of course, don't utilize the full potential of the batteries because they really expect the batteries to last a lot longer than that, so they only charge within a narrow band of 20% to 80%. They don't go from 0 to 100 back and forth to shorten the life of the battery because they want to make sure they can stand up to a 10-year warranty. But at some point, these batteries are going to reach a point where they're going to have to be recycled or replaced. Research that I've seen is that they're utilized second life on these batteries because the car batteries are much more robust than a standard battery. And even when they're 10 years old, they can be utilized as power backup systems or something else. But let's say they're just dead weight. Are we looking at, from the EV perspective, what we're going to be doing with all these batteries that are no longer of use as vehicle batteries?
I'll have to admit that I haven't gone to that extent, right? So what you described, which is a second life for a battery system in an electric vehicle, maybe utility for that particular vehicle is not there because there's just not enough range, but there's still life in those batteries, even if it's 50% of the capacity. So what I've looked into is just what happens to those. But if the question is what happens to those after they've been expended, then I don't have the answer to that. I imagine that there's some recycling that can be accomplished, but I have not explored that. Does anyone here have any
Yeah, so I got asked this question a lot. I used to be the former director of the Sierra Club, and so it was a common question. So first, you're right. Like, so for example, the BMW cars now actually come racks, and so they're designed so when your electric vehicles reach a certain point, you can literally take the battery out, rack it, and put it on your home. Again, they've kind of built it to be reused for storage purposes. But generally speaking, lithium-ion batteries are highly desirable from a recycling perspective. So just like any valuable metal, there's going to be a market for that and a desire to recycle it. So I sort of have little or no doubt that sort of at the end of 10 years, whatever it might be, when you're now done with your battery, there's actually going to be a market, it's cheaper for you to recycle it than it would be to try to dump it or do something else with it.
Historic concerns about lead-acid batteries and toxicity and recycling and everything don't really apply to the lithium battery technology which we see in vehicles today. And the second life of those batteries, which you probably wouldn't get in a lead-acid battery anyway, also provides additional utility beyond the vehicle life of the battery.
I think that's a definition of a softball question. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to help you. All right, good. Well, we have, again, a lot of interest here on battery systems, and I think we're covering most of them. One of our audience has asked a question about and I want to add before, as a caveat to this, we asked Blue Planet to come to this, but we had a scheduling problem. They are working with hydrogen and solar to power vehicles and to utilize it as storage, and it's an interesting story. If you go to our 2016 past forums, you'll see where Blue Planet was one of the presenters, and there's some pretty good information on what they're doing. But I'm going to ask the panelists a question. Eventually, we'll have hydrogen full at the home and generate our own electricity. Any thoughts about where we are in terms of hydrogen as either a fuel for a vehicle or hydrogen as a storage medium for electricity?
So,
We'll start you.
okay. So Blue Planet, which Bill mentioned, they are involved in actually trying to produce hydrogen, proved up that concept, but they also engaged a consultant, a professor from UH, to get involved in this ongoing utility long-term planning process that we've been mentioning here and there. That's the one where the utility keeps on trying to come up with a viable plan for the future and keeps on getting rejected. So that UH professor ran some analysis that showed that with existing technology, so forget the flux capacitors or whatever that are around that are possibly around the corner or whatever, existing technology, he says that using hydrogen as storage is the cheapest option. So I think it's something we need to seriously consider and keep in mind. But this guy is a very smart guy, and he ran his own extensive analysis. So it should be sort of like in the mix.
So I think the key issue always is price, right? So overseeing some of the product development we've done, we oftentimes have somebody come in showing this really amazing battery that did amazing, incredible things. Lasted 20 years, no, loss of life over that 20 years. And then sort of the question would be, what's the price? And sort of at that point, the conversation typically ends. It's usually price that drives a lot of this stuff. And so to some extent, I think all these technologies have potentials for reductions in price, and eventually that technology is going to sort of take over and win. And I think we have yet to really figure out what that is going to be. Currently, I think lithium ion is sort of the product of choice, and maybe it will be storage over time. But one other just quick example, Tasmania, sort of comparable to Hawaii, population around 500,000. They had a lot of wind online, and they're curtailing it, essentially shutting it down a lot. Roughly 30% of their electricity is coming from wind. So they basically developed load control banks, which are basically fancy, about the size of a Matson container truck, resistant, basically like I'd call it a toaster, basically. It just took electricity, created heat, and that's it, right? And they had these things interconnect, and relatively cheap. They build them themselves. This is not, over-the-counter kind of product. They plug these in, and within a month, they're able to go to about 70% of electricity coming from wind. And now they're able, if wind goes up, wind goes down, they're able within microseconds, able to adjust and keep the frequency of the grid perfectly stable. So they're essentially wasting electricity, but able overall reduce the price of electricity to all the residents because wind's cheap. They're now able to use a lot more wind. They keep it on all the time, and they've just done this. Once you've now said, hey, wasting electricity makes a lot of sense and overall allows us to shut down fossil fuel generation, more expensive resources, you're now able to do a lot of creative things like say, well, let's just go ahead and create some hydrogen instead of wasting it. Let's go ahead and, desalinize water. You can do any public good as long as you can say the source will be a little erratic, you can do something beneficial with it. And it really allows you to be creative about a lot of these future, what are we going to do with it? Again, the idea of being a load control bank really unlocks renewable energy to be on all the time.
Life of the Land actually proposed a solution that could deal with hydrogen very effectively. It requires 2 changes in state law, and we were unable to persuade the legislature to make the changes. First, 95% of all the hydrogen made in the United States is made from fossil fuel. So it's clear we do not want hydrogen, we want renewable energy hydrogen. And the state policy right now is we want a renewable energy hydrogen future. That's part of state law. What is not part of state law is that the research has to be done on renewable energy hydrogen. Right now, state law says use whatever kind of hydrogen you want. The second thing is, while the electric utility is required to increase its renewable energy content, the gas company is not. The gas company was 5% renewable a decade ago, and they're now about 1% renewable. They're going backwards. They are not doing it. The simplest way of increasing hydrogen is to require the gas company to follow the same RPS law as the electric utility, to have Blue Planet produce their hydrogen off their solar panels, give it, sell it to the gas company. The gas company can put it in their existing pipes to supplement their existing gas to make it stronger, and it would be a ready market for it today. Obviously, down the road, you would want hydrogen for fuel for transportation because we have a lot of renewable energy sources for electricity, but for transportation, we have basically 3: biodiesel, renewable hydrogen, and electrification. So hydrogen for transportation would make some sense.
I can't answer that.
So I will pass. Don't quote me on these numbers. I'm getting a little older and I'm having a senior moment, but I think to generate hydrogen, you need to generate 60 kilograms of hydrogen per kilowatt. I think is the conversion, and I think it's about 2 cents a kilowatt hour on solar PV to do that. So, and we're not there yet. I mean, 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I guess, is where we're at for a big, huge system that Xterra is just putting in. And that's that one you're talking about. So, you're not going to build solar just to create hydrogen. You're not going to oversize your PV system just to create hydrogen. However, with battery management systems being better as they are now, you're not going to flood your battery with constant electrons to charge it. You're going to back off on that charging every once in a while. And when you back off, you could use that existing solar in your home to create hydrogen. You could do a hour ahead, day ahead, 3-day forecast on the weather to now anticipate what kind of state of charge you'll need on your battery, and you could back off on your solar PV at home to now use that to create hydrogen. So there are ways to do that.
Right, it's like what Jose was saying, for when you have excess wind or solar, you pump water uphill.
But you don't build your system in order to do that. The same way if you have excess solar at home that you can't use at one point, you can convert it to hydrogen, because otherwise you'd just be wasting it.
Real quick to add, yeah, I think that's the concept of basically using the excess, whatever, like all you folks are mentioning, to basically create a fuel, which is a form of storage, right? And then you use it when you need it. But what that UH professor was looking at was the challenge of the seasonal differences, summer versus winter or whatever, and how we navigate that. And so, how do we get to 100%, right? The thinking is we're going to have to probably overproduce in certain, during the sunnier seasons and then store up for, the less sunnier seasons or periods. And like again, his analysis showed that hydrogen could be cost effective.
Robert, this one's for you. Tell me, when will it make sense to pull the plug on Helco?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I mean, because it really depends on, and I address this to all the utilities, right? And again, not just even in Hawaii, I'd say across the country, what level of innovation, flexibility they're going to have. A quick example, Jeff Michelina, if you've heard him speak, has given this example before, so you may have heard it. But Netflix, when they first came along, actually approached Blockbuster, and for this, hopefully most of you know what Blockbuster is, approached Blockbuster and said, hey, would you like to buy us? Like, we've got this great thing. What do you think? Blockbuster said, no, we've got these great buildings where we sell, or we rent DVDs, and that's a great model. We make tons of money. Why would we want to start mailing it? And sure enough, now we know what Netflix is, and we may now have to explain what Blockbuster was to those who are in their 20s or younger. I think conceptually you have a situation where there's going to have to be adaptation of business and a change and a flip and a way of thinking. And if it doesn't, then we start talking about who's going to take over grid management. It could be a new system operator. It could be a cooperative. Who knows, right? But it is a time of change, and technology disrupts, and usually it's generally good, but sometimes there's some short-term pain in the midst of that.
A little more specific.
Well, it also depends on the type of facility you have.
Well, I'm getting there.
example,
I'm going to go there. And then you, please. Okay, you got PV on your house. You're going to want to look into batteries. And you're running about a 10 kW consumption in a 24-hour period, average house in Hawaii. We got days that are perfect and days that aren't. So today you could, if money wasn't an object, and you've stressed money over efficiency, and that's obviously the bottom line for everybody. But let's just assume for a minute money isn't a problem. What do you need to get there from here with today's technology?
So on an individual resident perspective, going off grid is entirely economical today for most circumstances. And in fact, in some circumstances, we've looked at it where installing a solar plus storage and staying grid connected is actually more expensive than going off grid because of the circuit panel upgrades you may have to do in your home to allow the two-way flow and to be up to code. That being said, what should be the most economical situation should be you staying connected to the grid and offering grid services that help all of the ratepayers save money. So it helps the ratepayers save money, and it helps you save money while you're using your system when you may not need it, when your battery has too much, to help benefit the grid. And that should be the most economical model for both ratepayers and for the individual, to have some grid connection. The only player in all that necessarily loses out currently is the utility, who doesn't necessarily make money off of that exchange of kilowatts or services. And so how do we create it where there's sort of a win-win-win situation? That's sort of the struggle we're having, generally speaking. So again, if economics were to work, you'd stay grid connected. That being said, there's a very real circumstance in the near future where off-the-shelf technology and going off grid is just the better option for you.
So is the business model barrier that we're dealing with not just Helco, but utilities in general, in which their 20th century model is we make our money off of generating power, and the grid we manage because that's how we sell power, not rather that we're in the business of managing power, we're in the business of selling power, not in generating it. So if we look at that, what is it going to take? Is this a federal barrier of entry for us here in Hawaii because we have a kind of a unique status from FERC and things of that nature, being out here, not connected to any other grids on the continent? What's the barrier to get that done, to change that? Let's assuming that we've got a willing partner with HEI companies. What is it going to take?
So I think state policy absolutely controls everything here in the electrical arena. I think it has very little to do with federal policy. I think it's the willing partner with HEI is, I think, the challenge fundamentally, and the regulatory system that kind of encourages HEI not to be a willing partner. I'll just sort of show maybe the level of disruption, and maybe I'll pass it off to Henry a little bit, because Henry has reported in the PSIP, HECO's and HELCO's Power Supply Improvement Plan, that the top 10 largest customers of electricity are looking to do their own self-generation, or looking to go off-grid. This past year in the legislature, the University of Hawaii, one of the largest purchasers, is looking to go off their own grid. I mean, you can go through the examples, but you could just imagine where electric utility, suddenly their consumption drops by 40%, 60%, drastic, radical changes are happening in the next 5 years. This is going to happen. So, again, my crystal ball is no better than anyone else's. I think at some point the disruption happens so much, there is a come to Jesus moment, and either the right choice is made and we sort of see more of this interactive grid, sort of one course, or the wrong choice is made and you're going to see continuing grid and load defection and sort of everyone for themselves kind of model.
In the current HELCO rate case that the Public Utilities Commission is currently evaluating, HELCO has stated to the PUC that their 10 largest customers on this island, which require 1/6 of the total power produced by HELCO, those 10 customers have the capacity and are thinking about off-grid operations. The utility will not discuss publicly who those 10 are. But there are two other related issues, and it deals with the issues that you were addressing before, Bill. First is whether you pull the plug with the utility depends on what reliability level you want. If you have somebody at home with a medical condition, you may want both Robert's system and the grid system for added redundancy, for protection, and you're going to cut the cord at a different point than someone else. The other thing that the utility is facing right now is in this state, anybody can form an electric utility anywhere and compete head-on with the utility. You would become a utility yourself under certain conditions. Under certain conditions, you would be regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, but not necessarily. And it's those fine lines that can shape what happens and whether the utility moves faster or slower.
So as Jose said in his presentation about a nice to have in the future, these microgrids that become much more resilient because we don't have one centralized grid to fail and then try to bring it back up again. Isn't there, let's say you had subdivisions that decided to want to create their own microgrid. Isn't there formidable barriers of entry to get that done through the regulatory process with PUC?
No. If you do it entirely by, let's say, for example, you want to build a condo, and you have a piece of property, you have a bunch of buildings on it, you lease each one or you sell each one to a whole bunch of homeowners, but it's a condo association subdivision. The condo association could have its own electric grid. If it's renewable, it might not even need any regulation by the Public Utilities Commission under existing law.
I would mildly disagree in that if you're crossing property lines and if you're selling power, you're going to be defined as public utility. And most entities don't want to do that, just from the level of regulatory oversight, the approval you're going to need from a commission, et cetera. So currently, microgrids are challenging if you're crossing property lines, regardless of renewable energy. There was a proposal a couple years ago to try to loosen that around renewable energy. Going forward, I think that'll be a continued conversation, and I think Jose, you might be able to speak to this as much and as well that there is some regulatory hurdles to it on a larger basis. I think Soul Home, which are sort of is it nanogrid? I think is the term of choice. I think that's very much happening and will continue to happen.
I think I mildly disagree with what you're saying as well. Our interpretation of the law is you can cross TMKs, you can cross property boundaries as long as you are not intentionally serving others. You're serving a particular individual customer. So in that sense, you could do that and not be a utility. For example, I'll take the condo case. If the condo is in one TMK, and let's say Parker Ranch is across the street, I could serve the condo and not be a utility.
Well,
As long as
one TMK.
utility has, yeah, one meter on that TMK, and they're check metering all the other houses there. So there's one bill basically coming in, being paid by that condo.
And being the lawyer, the question was a subdivision, which in that case, I'm assuming you're going to have multiple TMKs and multiple homes. And I think it'd be tricky for a street, for example, or an association to come together and say, we're going to serve ourselves. That would be hard.
Unless that Parker Ranch crosses the street to the subdivision and has a bunch of devices in each person's yard, which is a subsidiary of Parker Ranch, and it's not Parker Ranch selling the power to each homeowner, it's the device in their backyard, which is a little baby subsidiary with no people working for it, that is actually selling it. So there are ways around, but you would need Robert to figure out, and Isaac to figure out exactly how it would be done.
And I shouldn't say Park Ranch, I should say Pineapple Power Company.
So maybe some employment opportunities for lawyers or whatever.
Yeah.
We would have to figure it out, but to the original question, where we would figure it out, we have everything we need basically here in the state. It would be ultimately, the legislature and the PUC figuring out the rules of the road.
I'll leave it with, we're just about out of time here. I want to leave you each with 1 minute to tell me, in your own words, how we get there from here based on tonight's forum. 1 minute each.
Middle. Let's start in the middle.
We'll start in the center and go like that. I think what we need to do is move exactly what we're doing, putting a lot of pressure for moving towards renewable energy and low climate change impacts, recognizing that, for example, greenhouse gas emissions are not just from electricity, 5% is from concrete, 9% is from agriculture. We have many ways of moving forward.
Well, for me, again, it's awareness. I think the product sells itself. I think the benefits that we talked about tonight are going to be available to the general public. Price parity will be there if you have a choice between an electric vehicle and a gasoline vehicle when you take into account the cost to operate the EV versus the gas vehicle. It makes a lot of sense. So I think increasing awareness will get us there quicker. I think there might be some benefit in terms of incentives in the near term that government can leverage to generate the interest and the adoption. But overall, I think that public awareness is going to be playing a great part in that, and it will continue to be the mission.
So I think regardless of federal policy, the momentum is not going to stop here. I think given the high prices of electricity and the need to be more responsive to technology disruption, to the challenges that we have, I think we're going to continue to see progress. I think we've been seeing that already. I mean, if you just look at the level of energy competency in the groups that have been involved with the utility and the Public Utilities Commission and the legislature. I mean, we say things like fast frequency response and transient overvoltage at Starbucks, when we're talking to each other. So that kind of shows you, where we're at in terms of this energy discussion. And I think because of that momentum, both in everyone's learning curves and in kind of understanding what the problem is here and what needs to get done, I think you're going to continue to see progress. So definitely you're going to need a disruption, in my opinion, in the regulatory front to get things moving. But I think there's a lot of good people out there that are working on that collectively.
So I would go to my 3 drivers of the counter wave was, so the existing progressive governments and institutions, the market itself, and then the people, really. So that sort of plugs into everything that folks were saying about awareness, about the wave of the market that can't be stopped right now, And really what we need to do is just bust through the status quo business as usual mindset. Or, in any kind of change situation, there are sort of winners and losers, although I think ultimately everything can be win-win-win. Because like this clean energy thing, it's not only good for the environment, but the great thing about folks like, check out Rocky Mountain Institute, they've figured out that clean energy is actually cheaper and overall would just explode our economy or whatever. It's beneficial on an economic level too. Explode in a good way in terms of booming it, right? Not blow up. We're blowing up the world now with, greenhouse gases. So we need to just get out of the way of the future, basically, and somehow bust through the status quo mentality.
Let me just briefly paint a picture. About 6 months ago, there was a large windstorm where power went out in a lot of different areas, and I believe it was Lanai that had almost a complete outage. Now imagine if that had happened and the local school or the community center had a solar plus storage system, the storage system kicked on, and you had a source for electricity. So if you needed your phone to be able to call family, you can go plug in, you can go interact. Or even if, let's say, there was one home on every street that had that, where you're able to stop by, instead of saying, can I have some sugar, you'd say, hey, can I, put my milk in your fridge for a little while? Can I charge up for a little while? Now imagine we had a couple of these homes on every street where these homes were able to actually help with the frequency or were able to actually prevent the grid from going down at all in the first place. I just paint that as sort of the positive picture of the change, and that's just, again, touching the surface of all the benefits, including creation of new jobs. Solar has been about 25% of the entire construction industry in Hawaii over the past, 5 to 6 years. A creation of a cheaper economy, so that way that money, instead of going to pay for fossil fuels, is able to be reinvested in education or other things. I think it's just a powerful, beautiful dream, much less even touching about the environmental and the other reasons. It's just purely economic. Ignore everything else. It's completely bipartisan. It doesn't matter. It's a rational, smart choice. And I think that's why it's going to happen. We just got to let it keep moving in the direction it is.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Jose. These gentlemen are leaders in their field, and we're very happy to have them here this evening. And I wanted to also thank my fellow board member, Scott Orway, on sound over here, Isaiah Heyer on camera, and Jane Clement. And not here, but here earlier, Mike Matsukawa. We are an all-volunteer organization here to serve you, the community, and we will be back in September. We're going to have a forum on healthcare in Hawaii Island. Why is it we have a Costco, but we have a third world medical system here? Come and find out. Appreciate you all coming this evening. Thank you so much. This is the representation of the kind of quality of speakers that we have here at West Hawaii Forum. And we put these monthly forums on to provide as much civic involvement and education on issues that are important to you, the community. We are one island. We are one community.